Welcome to Booktopia TV. I'm John Purcell, and I'm sitting here with critically acclaimed author P.M. Newton to talk about her new book, Beams Falling. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Booktopia and John.
It's a pleasure. Beams Falling, it's your second crime novel.
Yes.
The Old School was the first one, and it has the same lead character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a tiny brief story about the Old School, and then we'll talk about Beams Falling.
Okay. The Old School sort of came about a little bit accidentally. I'd actually been working on a book and had about 80,000 words written, starring a very tough, hard-nosed detective sergeant who was in the homicide squad. And it was an Australian Vietnamese woman whose name was Mute Kelly, and of course being in the New South Wales Police Force, having a Vietnamese first name, this was abbreviated to Ned, so she was Ned Kelly. But that book just didn't work. I couldn't work out how to make it work. And what ended up happening was that I realised I had the right character. She was just in the wrong book. And her backstory, that I thought was backstory, was actually a book. And that's what I ended up writing, The Old School, which ended up being set in 1992, towards the end of 1992, in Bankstown, which is somewhere where I had worked. And it revolved around the discovery of two bodies under a building site that then wound back into a crime that had been committed in the 1970s and even earlier.
That is a pretty tough call for an author to make on their own work. If you're 80,000 words in, just set it aside and begin again. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, I had help. I had help in making that decision, in as much as it was 80,000 words in and I still hadn't finished it. So I was having trouble landing the plane, as I've heard Dorothy Porter once refer to finishing a crime novel. And so I basically took my problem to a creative writing course at UTS. And I worked on a couple of chapters of that book, and it was a sort of good news, bad news story. The good news was people really liked it, really engaged with my writing, and that gave me confidence. The bad news was I eventually worked out that I had the wrong story, so it was a case of putting it aside and starting quite invigorated then, with a lot more confidence, thinking, yeah, this is the right story. This is where this story begins. It begins back here.
Well, that's a brilliant story for anyone writing.
Yeah.
To hear that you can you not lose faith in yourself in those moments.
Sometimes, and you can't look at it as wasted, because it's kind of funny. I know where the character goes. I kind of know what she's doing in a decade from now. Whether we get there, I don't know. But
well, we catch up with Ned again in Beams Falling.
Yes.
It's another quite hard nosed. How do you class your crime? Is it sort of a hard-boiled crime, or is it?
I guess with hard-boiled crime, people often think about witty Raymond Chandler-esque one-liners, and I try and write well. We all try and write well, but I would feel probably a bit intimidated if with that bar, just the way it's set. I kind of see them a bit as social histories, I guess, in that they take a real period in time and place. I very much set them in a specific time and place. So this one is mainly set in Cabramatta and starts actually only a few weeks after The Old School finishes in the sort of fictional timeline. The book stands alone, but if you have read The Old School, of course, there'll be layers in there.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of new characters, some old characters come back. I just really enjoy engaging with sort of cultural, social, political history, and then putting a layer of fiction on top of that, because I think with things like The Wire, that's why that worked so well. David Simon had made documentaries and written documentary books, Homicide, Life, A Year on the Street, and they worked well, but fiction, you shape it and you manipulate it, and I think that's why The Wire engaged in a way that nothing else he'd done prior to that did.
You read quite a lot of stories written by novelists who take on real-time subjects, real-life subjects. And when I'm reading those, I tend to find myself getting much closer to what I believe, what I concur with the author to be the truth.
Yes.
It's dangerous because it's so convincing. Fiction is so convincing, and sometimes you can be misled.
Well, I mean, that's the sort of magic of fiction, though, isn't it? That and it's almost unfair in that, you know, a journalist can do an amazing job and a profile of someone, and maybe a year from now you won't remember that person's name. This is what I love about writing. You know, it's crime fiction, but it's hopefully also social history, and yeah, it's tough, but I'm not a huge fan of kind of voyeuristic sex slasher crime fiction,
Yeah.
and I write about violence, but hopefully not gratuitously and not in a way that dwells, but more reflects on the impact and what's happened to people, how it affects people.
Yeah, because when thinking about Australian crime, often it seems to be less of the serial killer and crazy, but sort of a really realistic, somewhat unglamorous level of crime. But there is boredom, there is frustration.
Yeah.
The crime may not be the biggest
Yeah.
crime ever, but it's a crime which no one can get a grip on and make sense of.
Yeah.
Which I've always felt was far more realistic
Yeah.
than some of these American crime novels where there's you know, 16 serial killer come to that town. That's something.
You know, and it's what Raymond Chandler was arguing for in The Simple Art of Murder. You know, that well-quoted line about where he was actually reflecting on Dashiell Hammett and saying, you know, Hammett was the guy that put murder back into the hands of people who committed for a reason.
Yeah.
And you know, often the reasons are quite banal, but they're not generally, because I'm a psycho, they're people that are being motivated by very strong and real motivations to do these things, and that's the kind of crime that I'm interested in exploring as well.
Well, that brings me to the next question. It is based on so much of your past life. Before becoming an author, you were 15 years in the police force and detective. 13.
Unlucky for some.
13 years in the police force and a detective, and in Bankstown and where else?
I started my general duties career in uniform in Redfern, and then I transferred into plainclothes there, and I worked general duties plainclothes. I just attached to a police station at Redfern, Revesby, which was a substation of Bankstown, Hurstville, also up the Mid-North Coast, and then also in some specialist units, the Sexual Assault Unit, Drug Enforcement Agency, and Major Crime Squad. So that was balanced. Most of my career was actually spent in plainclothes as a detective. So yeah, I mean, I draw on my knowledge of the people that you worked with, the circumstances, the emotions. I'm not that hung up on the technicalities of it. You know, I won't go into great detail about what the specific gunman was, because that really actually just doesn't interest me that much to read.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid I shortchange my readers there, perhaps, but I hopefully provide veracity in other things that feel truthful.
Thank you very much, Pam.
Thank you for having me
It's been a
here.
pleasure.
Thanks for being at Booktopia. Tried to match.
We have a special offer with Beams Falling right now. You buy Beams Falling and you get the old school for free, which is a pretty good offer.
Because yes, as I say, they do stand alone, but there's Easter eggs in there for people that have read the first one. So. And
will Ned return?
I hope so.
Yes?
Yes.
Let's buy lots and lots of this novel and make sure that Ned returns.
It's in your hands.
PM Newton has won quite a few awards for the old school, and this book most likely will put up for a few awards as well, so it's definitely worth getting hold of both the books, and you can do so at booktopia.com.au.
That's a fabulous offer. I'm really pleased.